So, I wanted to talk about Garp, and in particular, I wanted to talk about what Garp did, or more importantly, did not do at Marineford. Which I'll be honest, I know people have mixed opinions on if he should have done more to save Ace. And so in this video, I will try to defend my position.
Hey yo, what the
I don't know how well I will, and I can't promise I'm Saul Goodman and will be able to defend it well, but I will try to do my best. Because for context, I'm someone who's currently going through One Piece, love it. It is incredible. I mean, I'm not exactly breaking news here. A lot of people know One Piece is incredible. And not long ago, I had to go through all the pain of Marineford and everything that happened there. I will probably always be like, Ace, you could have just kept running. I may never recover from that. But to be perfectly honest, I didn't think too much on if Garp did the right or wrong thing at Marineford until I was watching through post-Marineford recently, and there was one particular moment where Dodon confronted Garp about him not helping out Luffy and Ace, and this moment was really tough to watch because I love both of these characters. In fact, these are two of my favorite characters, and yes, full disclaimer, when I'm even discussing Garp in this video, I'm not exactly unbiased because yes, I love this character. I think I can still see his faults, but I do love him. And I love how you get to see in his character where Luffy gets a lot of his goofiness and his wackiness from. But also, to be clear with Luffy, and I'm not sure if this gets highlighted enough, but just like how he gets that silliness from Garp, he also gets his leadership from Dragon. In fact, Luffy will continually surprise me because one moment he's making a joke, the next moment he locks in and I'm like, okay, this is serious. And this man delivers an incredible speech time and time again. So yes, I say all of that to say I'm not exactly unbiased when I'm talking about Garp, but to be fair, I'm not exactly unbiased when talking about any One Piece character. Because regardless of the character, I'm gonna have some sort of feelings towards them, positive or negative. But yes, that whole moment where Dodon confronted Garp was definitely difficult to watch, and especially when she's kind of blaming him, saying you chose your job over your family. And when I was first watching this, I got overly defensive of Garp because at no point did I ever blame him for not doing more. And going into Marineford, I was just hoping he wouldn't get in their way. So when he basically let Luffy go by, I was like, okay, that's more than enough. But either way, then I heard different perspectives on this moment and I realized, like, you know what, I'm gonna give this some more thought. And after thinking on it some more, I mostly come to the same conclusion that I still defend Garp's actions. And so in this video, I'm gonna share the primary reasons why I still defend him. And also, I wanna be very clear what I'm actually arguing, because I'm not arguing that Garp shouldn't have saved Ace, because personally, I wouldn't have had a problem with that. But what I am arguing is, given the situation Garp was placed in, that I don't have an issue with him choosing not to save Ace. So I want to be clear, those two things are very different to me. Now, I do feel the need to mention one thing before getting into this discussion, which is that I do understand when talking about Garp or other Marine characters, there is that question of, even though the Marines of course do a lot of good in the world, given the Marines' association with the world government and the Celestial Dragons, are their characters still morally justified to be a part of the Marines, especially the upper ranking Marines I'm talking about? Because again, the lower level Marines, most of them probably have no idea of the atrocities the world government commits. So anyway, I mentioned that here to say I think it's a fair question to ask. I kind of want to shelve that discussion for this video and simply look at, okay, given the fact that Garp was a Marine at Marineford, given the circumstances on that day, did he act correctly? And I understand if you don't think it's fair to ignore that discussion from the discussion of Marineford, but personally, I'm still working through that question myself, so I kind of want to shelve that discussion for now. So now let me get into the primary reasons why I defend Garp, and really it boils down to two main reasons. The first of which has to do with what he represents, not simply to the Marines, but more so what he represents to the entire world, and then because of that, what the potential consequences would be had he tried to save Ace. Because when I look at Garp choosing to follow his duty instead of saving Ace, I think it's important to understand what his duty really is. Because honestly, the more and more I thought about it and how important Garp is, not simply as an individual, but how important Garp the hero is as the symbol, I started to realize just how crazy the consequences would have been for the entire world had he actually tried to save Ace. Because honestly, I believe had he done that, the world would have been significantly worse off for it. And I'm going to try to explain why, but really it all goes back to what Garp represents. Because again, Garp is not simply any Marine. No, he is the hero of the Marines. That means something to people. You get to see different examples of it when he turns up and people feel more at ease. For example, after Marineford, when Garp returned to Luffy's village, you got to see how freaked out the civilians were because all of a sudden there were a lot more pirates out and about, and you saw just how scared and confused they were. But the moment Garp showed up and he put up a sign saying the village is secured by him, instantly it put their minds at ease, because even a sign with Garp's name on it will ward off pirates. That is how much his name even means. In fact, I can make an argument that there is not a single individual in the One Piece world that represents justice and peace to the average civilian more than Garp the hero does. So again, I'm trying to establish just how important Garp is, not simply as an individual, but a symbol of justice to the entire world. So when I look at the context of Marineford, what Garp represents, I think it's also important to acknowledge that everything that was happening at Marineford was televised to the entire world. Now sure, there were a few outages, but for the most part, everything that happened there was shown to the entire world. So if something major happened at Marineford, it would have massive ripple effects throughout the entire world. We got to see a few examples of this, such as Whitebeard's final words, and how that inspired a bunch of pirates to set out to sea again. And the thing is, Whitebeard even saying some words made the world a more chaotic place. Now imagine if the entire world had to watch their hero, the hero of the Marines, somebody who has been such a shining example of justice for decades in the One Piece world. Imagine if they had to watch Garp turn against everything he spent his entire life standing for. If they watched him turn against the Marines to try and save a pirate. And not just any pirate, but a notorious Whitebeard pirate, and even more so than that, the son of the king of the pirates. Also, side note, I will not hear any Whitebeard slander. But the average civilian, they just look at these pirates as horrible criminals. Some of them they see as the worst people in the world. Like when Whitebeard died, there's a reason why the majority of people were celebrating. So anyway, I want to establish how confusing it would be to the entire world if they had to watch Garp try to save Ace. Because as I said, Garp is not just any random Marine, he is the hero of the Marines. He has to know what he represents, he has to know what his duty is, not simply to the Marines, but also the One Piece world. And personally, I would make the argument that as chaotic as things got after Marineford, had Garp tried to save Ace, they would have gotten significantly more chaotic. Because not only do I think the pirates would have been more emboldened, but I think the average civilian would be far more freaked out and confused and question everything. So even when the Dawn told Garp you chose your job over your family, if anything I see it more as he chose his duty to the world over saving Ace. Now again, I also want to be clear, even with all that context, I personally would not fault Garp for trying to save Ace, because I understand how important family is. But just like how I wouldn't fault him for that, I also don't fault him for making the tough decision to put his own feelings to the side, because he understands what he represents to the world, and how drastic the consequences could be for his actions. And even when looking at a character like Garp, I genuinely believe he doesn't really care about the world government. But what he does care about is protecting as many people as possible, and whether he's right or wrong, he currently sees his role as a Marine as the best way of doing that. And so something that I keep wanting to make clear is that when I defend Garp for choosing to follow his duty, I'm not talking about his duty to some sort of Marine institution or the world government, but I'm talking about the duty he feels he has to protecting the civilians of the world. And so if he chooses that duty, even over his own desires, I'm not exactly going to fault him for it. Because that's the interesting thing about Garp and his character, is he does pose questions such as, when do you follow your duty, or when do you follow love? And we have seen examples all throughout the story where he tries to wrestle with that as much as possible. For example, in Water 7, he runs into Luffy and his crew, and out of love for Luffy, he wants to let him leave without any resistance. But you see he also has to deal with his duty to the Marines, and when Sengoku reminds him of his duty, we see him try to walk that line between following his duty and also loving his family, where we see him try to stop Luffy, but he also doesn't try as hard as he could, giving him the chance to escape. And then of course, when Luffy does escape, he's not upset, he's actually impressed. So I mention all that to say, Garp is a character that is constantly conflicted between following his duty and also the love he has for his family. And unfortunately for him, those two things are usually in conflict because many of his family members are notorious criminals. so I feel like when he ran into Luffy in Water 7, that gave you a preview of the conundrum he would face at Marineford. And so when I look at the question of should Garp follow his duty or should he do what he can to save Ace out of the love for his family, I think it's important for me to convey the magnitude of his duty not simply to the Marines, but to the entire world. And then based on that, what are the potential consequences of choosing love over his duty? So these are some of the interesting questions that Marineford poses, particularly with Garp. But even so, you might still be of the opinion that when your family's involved, none of that should matter. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but that leads into the second primary reason why I defend Garp's actions. And that reason has to do with what did Ace want Garp to do in this situation? Did he want help from Garp? Did he want Garp to save him? Because I personally believe it matters what the person in need of saving wanted Garp to do. And I do think it's somewhat relevant that he never asked him for help. Now I understand you might be like he shouldn't need to ask, but One Piece is also a series where we've seen characters like Luffy, for example, not save a character until they actually ask him for help. You look at Nami in Arlong Park, or even Robin at Enies Lobby. Sure, Luffy showed up at Enies Lobby, but he still needed to hear Robin say she wanted to live and that she wanted to be saved. So I'm not exactly going to fault Garp for choosing to not go rogue and save someone who had not even asked for his help. I do think I would look at this moment differently had Ace asked him for help. But from every indication I got, Ace didn't seem to want Garp to get involved. And the thing is, if Ace really wanted Garp's help, he had the perfect opportunity when Garp was breaking down, being like, I don't know what to do. And you see in that moment how bad Ace feels and how much it's tearing him up what he's doing to Garp. And if anything, I think Ace might have been upset if Garp actually tried to save him. Because even when I look at the way Ace was acting throughout Marineford, we see the way he reacts when the Whitebeard pirates show up or when Luffy shows up. And how at first he was actually upset with them for showing up because he didn't want the guilt associated with people dying or getting hurt for him. And sure, maybe Ace didn't deserve such a public execution, largely because he was Roger's son. But the fact is, against the wishes of Whitebeard and the Whitebeard pirates, he chose to go after Blackbeard. He certainly knew if he lost to Blackbeard, he could die. And if anything, the fact that he was even alive to be executed was fortunate for him. Because we've seen other characters say, in the One Piece world, losing a fight often means losing your life. So even though Ace was a reckless character who constantly put his life on the line, the last thing he wanted was to be burdened by the guilt of other people suffering for his mistakes. Now sure, as time went on, he even said like, okay, I'm going to accept my fate whether I'm saved or I die. Because here's the thing, Ace deep down might have wanted to be saved, and he might have wanted his family to show up and save him. But what I'm trying to establish is, if he felt that guilty about a group of pirates showing up, who are already criminals showing up to save him, I would only expect he would feel even worse if he thought Garp had to throw away everything he had spent his entire life standing for, because he tried to save him, and I could imagine how guilty Ace would feel. Because that's the thing about Ace, he may have been reckless, but he was also willing to face the consequences. And so when he looks at Garp, at no point did he ever expect him to help him out. Because he understands the many times Garp wanted him to become a Marine, he told him over and over and over again, please do this for me. So when Ace became a pirate, he understood the consequences of what that could mean one day. Even when he was talking to Luffy and they're making their promises as kids to set out to sea. Even as a child, he knew what that could mean. And he told Luffy becoming pirates might mean we become enemies with the old man. And they were both perfectly fine with accepting those consequences. And at no point did he expect Garp's help or seem to even want it. Or even with Luffy, he never expected Garp to help him. The only time he asked Garp to do something at Marineford was simply to move out of the way or to not stop him from saving Ace. And the thing is, despite everything Garp represented and everything he said, when it actually came down to it and when Luffy was pleading with Garp to let him go by, Garp in that moment couldn't refuse his family and did in his own way let Luffy go by. So I mention all that to say that I truly believe had Ace also pleaded with Garp to help him, that in spite of everything Garp represented or everything he had said up to that point, that much like he couldn't refuse Luffy and let him go by, that he also wouldn't be able to refuse Ace. However, as I said, Ace never even asked Garp. So I'm trying to establish that neither Ace nor Luffy were upset with the way Garp acted at Marineford. So if even those two are fine with it, I find it hard for me to take a lot of fault with Garp. And I think Ace's feelings on this matter are somewhat relevant when it comes to evaluating Garp's decision to not save him. So yes, when I look at all the circumstances around Garp and what he represents, and when I look at how Ace felt about Garp not getting involved, I still think Garp did mostly the right thing at Marineford. And for me, letting Luffy go by and not standing in their way was more than enough. But those are just my thoughts. Maybe you disagree with me. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. And also, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more, please hit that subscribe button and that like button as well. It really does help. And thank you for watching.